and welcome to the first episode of CinemaSpection. I'm Tim Luz.
And I'm Alyssa Krasner.
And we're going to be discussing Lifeforce.
Oh, one of the best sci-fi operas ever. Just amazing. And hey, more blood tits. So there you go.
All right, we're going to have to explain that one in a bit. Okay, first of all, fair warning, the movie is damn near 30 years old, so we're going to be spoiling the hell out of it as we discuss it.
I think at this point, if it's 30 years on, spoilers are allowed.
And I think most people who are interested will have seen this already, just by sheer reputation alone.
All right.
Before we get into it, let's get a little plot synopsis first. A joint American and British space mission, led by U.S. Air Force Colonel Robert Carlson, sets out in the space shuttle Churchill to investigate Halley's Comet as it approaches Earth. Inside the cone of the comet, they discover a derelict alien spacecraft and its passengers. 3 physically perfect humanoids. 2 men, 1 woman, 0 clothes. By the time the Churchill returns to Earth orbit, it's a charred ghost ship, but the 3 aliens remain mysteriously undamaged. They are brought back to London, where the girl awakens and begins draining people of their life energy, leaving them desiccated husks that revive after 2 hours to seek victims themselves. After the girl escapes, SAS Colonel Colin Kane and biochemist Hans Fallada must track her down and destroy her before she spreads her vampiric contagion across London and possibly the world. Their only weapon is Carlson, who escaped the Churchill and has developed a psychic link to the vampire. But can he resist his growing obsession with her, and what role is he destined to play in her insidious plan? So, first of all, why don't you tell us how you first experienced this amazing cinema classic?
Well, when I was a wee girl, I used to watch WPIX, which was this awesome channel that we got from New York. I used to live in Boston. So they showed like such cinema classics as Xanadu, the old like 1960s Godzilla movies, which I know you're a big fan of, and just these amazing like cult classics. And one of them was Lifeforce, and I had always grown up on the like severely cut, no nudity, like theatrical cut, I guess you could say, version of Lifeforce. And when I first saw it, basically there were just 2 things that I could think of: Steve Railsback and Steve Railsback. Really,
you have my sympathies. I actually came to it the same way, although first of all, I remember it being on HBO and seeing the first, the opening 10 minutes with like space shuttle and spaceship.
Oh, so you got to see all the nudity.
Well, no, let me get to that. It just spaceship and giant bat creatures like, oh, this is cool. Mm-hmm. And then cut to the first full frontal shot of Matilda May, and my mother's like, nope, out of the room.
Oh, no.
That seemed to happen a couple times. I remember that happening with Terminator, too. Michael Bihn's butt shows up. It's like, nope, you're out.
Oh, denied.
So there are a lot of sci-fi movies I'd see the first 5 minutes of, something like that happens, and like, nope, I catch up with it later. So, same for me, PIX, and they had to cut around all the nudity, but I still loved all the bizarre puppet effects and blue lightning flashing from people and Peter Firth badassery. So.
Oh, God, yes. I mean, it was different from any other movie that I had seen up to that point. I mean, like, I started out really young with, like, such great horror classics as Hellraiser, and that kind of thing, and of course Nightbreed.
Yeah.
And so this was kind of along that same genre line, where it was something different and interesting and just a really totally different take on the whole space vampire, which really hadn't been done before.
Not really. I mean, like, there's Planet of the Vampires, but that kind of is the only one that really springs to mind. I remember thinking that it's a great combination of, science fiction movies I loved, alien invader movies, and Hammer horror movies at the same time.
Yeah,
and take the
definitely.
2 of them and squeeze it together. And a lot of the way the movie is put together feels like a deliberate tribute to those. There's a lot of very gothic imagery in it, from the alien spaceship to the beginning to the fact that the end of it takes place in a church.
Yeah.
2 naked people on a crypt.
Yeah, and even before that, she's wearing the standard white dress.
Yep.
That the Hammer horror heroines, say that 3 times fast, wore.
Well, let's go over a few facts. It's based on the book by Colin Wilson, is it? Did I get that right?
Yep.
Which is a very strange book. I actually finally read it last year, and it's fairly different from the movie. It is a lot more futuristic. There's a lot less of the gothic element to it. It's a lot more metaphysical and gets into a lot more of the psychology behind it. This idea of vampirism, not just the eating other animals and drinking blood and stuff, but the idea of psychic vampirism as something that's inherent in our society.
Yeah, and didn't also Carlson have a wife in that?
He did, yeah, which I kind of missed them bringing up in the movie. In the movie, we don't really have much backstory for him, or pretty much anybody in the movie. There was this whole sense of him being torn between his attraction to this creature and his wife and his child and trying to balance the two, and comes across as a bit more active than the character in the movie. In the movie, he is kind of a slave to this thing and basically stands around and is obsessed and yells and gives a lot of weird and clunky exposition.
Well, I wouldn't say weird and clunky. I think it's more of the fact that since he is Mr. Exposition here, the hammer falls to him. I mean, in some scenes, I think he pulls it off. There's a scene that we'll discuss that's a little contentious. I feel that Steve did a good job, and you not so much.
I guess it also doesn't help that in a couple scenes we see other actors doing the same thing but better. You look at Frank Finlay, every time he gives exposition, it's like, oh, it's just amazing to listen to. Something else I wanted to bring up is that how many parallels you can see between this and Dracula. I mean, some very specific ones, and a lot of stuff that wasn't in the book, like the whole thing of the Churchill becoming this ghost ship and being discovered drifting through space. It's kind of a nice echo of the opening scene where they discovered the alien ship,
right.
But also it is the Demeter.
Definitely.
And it's interesting to think that this was 1984 into 1985 when it was released. A year later, after Challenger, they would not have done that scene with a burnt-out space shuttle. That's kind of a creepy echo of that. So then you have all these characters are kind of parallels to it. Matilda May, the space girl, is pretty much Dracula. Carlson's an interesting mix of both Jonathan Harker, a guy who brought this evil back to London, but also kind of mean in the sense that he's obsessed with her. Frank Finlay is most definitely Van Helsing, and actually played Van Helsing in a version of Dracula with Louis Jourdan back in the 70s.
Count Dracula, yes. Yeah. It's one of my favorites.
So that's pretty perfect. Peter Firth, I don't know who you'd make he's kind of action man in this. So
would he be Quincy Morris, do you think?
To some degree, maybe, but also...
Or maybe a dash of, like, Arthur Holmwood.
I was kind of leaning toward Holmwood, yeah. And then Dr. Armstrong, Patrick Stewart's character, is almost like Seward gone bad.
Really, really bad.
And Ellen Page there, I can't remember the last name was, different Ellen. She's almost kind of the Renfield, too.
Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, the whole stake through the heart is now the iron sword through the double solar plexus.
Which the Dr. Flatta character kind of pulls out of nowhere. Like, I just ordered this from the museum, maybe it'll work.
And it's funny because we just watched it recently, and I was just amazed. I have never heard of that before. I've heard of, like, the stake through the heart, I've heard of cutting off the head, but I'd never heard of, like, the iron, you know. I mean, I've heard of it for, like, you know, the Fae, but...
Yeah. It was, and leaded, too. I thought, okay, is it a radiation thing? But even so, as a biochemist, he kind of makes that jump pretty quickly.
Are the vampires, you know, Superman? Can't see through that? You know, what's going on there?
And as I said, he figures out it's not the heart, but under the heart, which all I can think of is, all right, hold still, wait. No, okay, not there. Hang on, let me try over here. No, all right, not quite. All right, there we go.
Yeah, it has to be very precise.
The movie was released on June 21st, 1985. Not a huge success, only made about $11 million against a $25 million budget, although it was pre-sold so much internationally, apparently it was in the black pretty early anyway.
Oh, great.
It opened against, this is a killer, Return to Oz, which also didn't do very well, unfortunately.
Movie.
Great movie this. And Cocoon, which pretty much trounced it. And then 2 weeks later, Back to the Future opened, so that was the end of it right there.
No chance.
It was kind of a tough summer for horror movies because you had Day of the Dead that same summer, which, I mean, barely opened because of its rating. The Bride, which, you know, didn't do very well.
Now, see, I like that movie.
Oh, so did I. The only one that really scored was Return of the Living Dead, which, ironically, was almost directed by Tobe Hooper.
Oh, really?
And then he stepped aside for Dan O'Bannon to direct that. He actually brought O'Bannon in to write the script for this one.
Fantastic.
And Fright Night, which was the big hit for horror movies that summer.
Love Fright Night. Chris Sarandon can do no wrong.
Absolutely. Let's go over some of the cast. Okay, the big one is Carlson, which is Steve Railsback.
Woohoo!
Probably best known for the stuntman and as Charles Manson Helter Skelter, although I always see Dwayne Barry from the X-Files whenever I see him.
I remember seeing Helter Skelter a few years back, and the only thing I'd really seen of his was Lifeforce, and so it completely just freaked me out to see him like that, and I was like, oh my god.
Railsback, I have as we've established, some problems with his acting in this one. It's kind of shallow, but the monobrow is a bit of a distraction in some of the close-ups. But mostly his demeanor in this, especially when he's freaking out, is just so over the top. I have a little trouble taking him seriously. And it kind of shows off some of the weaknesses of the script where he's constantly kind of spitting out this exposition like, I can feel her, I can see into her mind now. Kind of out of nowhere, but...
Yeah, I can see your point there. Where the heck is that coming from? Does he have, like, a psychic link with her? Like, how is that? And then later on, when she's, like, telling him, like, you were always one of us, I mean, what the hell does that mean? Like,
yeah, I thought she was turning him into a vampire from the moment he opened the crate on the space shuttle and started getting drained and taking some of her energy, too, and that's where the psychic connection came in and everything. But yeah, there's a lot of dialogue towards the end that suggests this is something that's been going on for far further back.
And it's like, you know, Haley's Comet hits like every 76 years. Carlson's only, I assume in this movie, like late 30s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if you're going that route, like how did they get here? Like, or is Carlson like a plant and he only like remembers like 35 years in the past, but he's really like 76, or,
it might
or
explain
however
his
that
lack
would
of
work.
backstory.
Yeah.
Or is he
Yeah.
descended from something somehow related from their earlier visit
Yeah.
76 years before? Yeah, they never really illuminate that
Not
very
a
well.
not a peep.
Next we have the incredibly cool Peter Firth as Colin Kane, you know.
I love this
MI5
man.
badass.
I love this man. I mean, I remember the first thing I saw him in was this great gothic production of Northanger Abbey from the BBC, and he played the love interest in that. It was just amazing. Such a dry wit, and of course from MI5, or as they call it in the UK, Spooks, which I am a huge fan of, and just love Peter Firth. Could watch him all day.
I remember him as the political officer in Hunt for Red October that
Oh, yeah.
Sean Connery kills in the opening. And nobody else likes it, but he's one of the bad guys in the remake for Mighty Joe Young. He was such an incredibly great villain in that one, too. But this is the first place I saw him, and just as the moment he strides into the movie, he just owns it.
May I ask which of you is Dr. Bukowski?
Hiya.
I'm Colonel Kane.
From the essayist?
Gentlemen, that last remark is not for publication. This is a D-notice situation.
He should have been James Bond. He would have been
God,
fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, he has definitely a whole like Daniel Craig aspect.
Yeah.
This movie was very prescient on that, I think, on a lot of that. Just, you know, in terms of characters, like we'll mention, of course, later on when the big man himself comes up. But very interestingly, like looking back on it, you can see like a lot of, well, of course they would pick this person for that character.
Yeah.
So, it would have been amazing to see him as James Bond. But we did get him as Harry Pierce.
We did, so that's kind of close.
Yeah.
And he manages to make the turtleneck and trench coat just look
Oh,
incredibly
he rocks
badass.
it.
Just
He
seems-
totally rocks it.
so much of the second half of this is like him standing against stuff looking like he's posing with the gun
Yeah.
or the big
Oh, jeez.
blade thing. He just looks incredibly cool. Then Frank Finlay as Falada. That's a lot of alliteration.
Hans Ballada.
Or falafel, as you kept calling him.
Yep.
He has a very Christopher Lee presence in this part. That's what I
Most
kept
definitely.
thinking of every time I'd see him. I could imagine this if there was a Hammer movie made in like the 60s or 70s, him having that part. But he just has that great voice whenever he's delivering this very scientific, intelligent sort of dialogue.
If I'm correct, the life force is conserved always and in all things, even after death.
And you think that applies to what's happened here tonight?
Yes. Yes, I do. I think that girl, creature, drained energy, life force partially from Bukowski and totally from the guard.
And it's interesting to see how he and Peter Firth just nail into their characters. In terms of Falada, he's, the scientist. As soon as it starts happening, he's very coolly putting it together like, okay, there's a 2-hour pattern to how these attacks happen and analyzing it scientifically. Meanwhile, Kane is just looking at it from a sort of law enforcement status. Okay, how do we track this person down? What clues can we use to get here and here? So some of the interesting stuff he was in. We mentioned the Count Dracula one. Also has the villain in Shaft in Africa.
Oh my god.
And I mentioned earlier, I didn't realize this was him. He was Adrian Brody's father in The Pianist and Helen Mirren's father in the last few Prime Suspect installments.
Oh, amazing.
And Marley's ghost in Christmas Carol with George C. Scott.
Oh, yeah. I now that you say it, yes.
And what was it you just saw him in?
I actually saw him in Blackadder, the first series of Blackadder, as the witch something pursuant something chased by a bear, I think. But that's one of the first things I saw him in. And I recognized him only because, oh my god, that's Fallada from Lifeforce. And totally amazing.
That brings us to Matilda May. Though it says introducing, she had been in a couple of movies in France before this.
She played Colette.
Yep.
In a production which was fantastic, and speaking in her real voice. Yes, she was dubbed for this film, but amazing actress. Like you had mentioned, the facial movements that she makes throughout the course of the film really gives her like this otherworldly, eerie quality that just makes her performance really amazing.
Just the physicality in general. You mentioned
Yeah.
she's a dancer, and you can really see how carefully she moves, how still she is in a lot of scenes. Like when she first wakes up in the Space Center for the first time, sits up and takes this big breath like she's never breathed before. And then when she's controlling that guard and kind of pulling him in, she does this thing with her eyes where her eyes just kind of keep opening wide, then normal, and wide, then normal. Like that's how she's subtly, hypnotically controlling him. A lot of interesting, subtle stuff like that in her performance that I liked.
And, speaking as a woman, just going to throw this out there and say, great pair of tits. I mean, and I say this as an admirer and as just, got it. I wish I had those. But, physically, not a skinny waif at all. A very strong, lithe look. And that really worked well, I think, for the film. Because you could, especially when she's described as, the most feminine presence that these characters had ever known, you could totally buy it because she is this just magnetic, and it's not just her looks, but it's her whole personality, her movement, the way that she acts. It's just, it's really a truly amazing performance, and it really sort of brings the movie together.
And it would take a lot of courage to do. I mean, the fact she's barely clothed, that she's walking around in what had to be very cold weather doing that, with stuff exploding around her, but not flinching or anything, just being very locked on to what she's doing. Yeah, she does a great job.
I think on the special edition Blu-ray, she talks about how she kind of trained for it, where she kind of went into dancer mode and sort of into a trance, if you would, and just kind of, was very sort of tried to be as present in the moment as possible. And she really pulled it off. And Railsback also mentions that he was very protective of her, because a lot of their scenes together, she's of course naked, and he's not until the very end. But he, was very protective because he knew how much, hey, when you're naked, you're very vulnerable. And I mean, then this poor girl, for most of the movie,
in a foreign country on this very big movie set,
not speaking a lot of English, she learned kind of day to day.
In a movie with all these special effects and all this insane stuff going on around her,
and to pull off the performance that she pulls off is nothing short of totally amazing. Plus, hey, like we said, blood tits. That's all I'm gonna throw that out there. This movie, I mean, will forever for me be just blood tits.
Next we have Aubrey Morris as Sir Percy, who I always think of as the really creepy social worker from Clockwork Orange, and there's a couple scenes where he has that same kind of leering quality in that scene where he's describing when they find one of the guys who had been drained by her, and he's talking about, yes, the whole thing left him exhausted, didn't want to talk about it, with this creepy sort of, it was really fascinating and cool to listen to quality to him. He was also the creepy gravedigger from The Wicker Man. And the Golga Frinchin captain from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy TV show. God. He's just a very odd screen presence, and he's interesting in this one that when he's introduced, he's one of the first cast members who actually seems horrified by what's going on. Everyone else takes in a very British, very in stride kind of, oh yes, space vampires, people being, sucked into dried husks. He kind of is looking like this, what is going on here?
In that one scene in the hospital, he's, spoilers, when a certain character is under the influence, and he's like, oh my god, is this something that we should do? Is this right? Is this normal? And he just struck me as the epitome of the British stereotype of, oh, we must do this by the book, and you can't do this, and and it's like, and I just love the look on Peter Firth's face where he's like, hey, dude. Queensberry's rules are out. This is full on. If you don't like it, get the fuck out. And then Carlson actually says it to him. It's like, if you don't like it, get the fuck out. So he's just, again, another one of those British character actors that just really brought a lot to the table on this and made it a much more cohesive world.
And I like how it's not really in the script, but he and Firth kind of have this, they hint to this past relationship where he's the kind of guy, he's supposed to be, I can't remember what ministry position he has in the movie. I think it's...
He's a Home Secretary.
Home Secretary, that's right. And you get the sense he's had to put Kane out in these kind of missions before and trusts his judgment. But there's, spoilers, he does get killed, and there's this great moment where Kane is kind of draped over him, like trying to revive him. And just, when he realizes he's dead and his neck's broken, just kind of stops and just seems... It's one of the few little kind of moments of emotion we get from him. It's just a nice, tiny little touch there. The other big one is Michael Gothard as Bukowski, who doesn't have a huge part, but something about his performance I find kind of interesting. He has this very languid quality to it, well, especially
very
after...
tired.
Yeah,
very tired.
He gets attacked by her earlier in the movie, and for the rest of the movie, he just looks kind of nauseous in the background, like, ugh, you mind if I go lay down somewhere?
Yeah,
but
he looks like he needs a good stiff drink. I mean, for most of his performance after that.
As I mentioned, the only other big thing I could find from him was as one of the bad guys in For Your Eyes Only, the assassin that Roger Moore gleefully kicks off the cliff in the car there. And he has this very great, deep voice to him. It's an interesting part. Watching again, it's interesting that when you watch from the beginning, if you didn't know who the cast were, like you didn't know that Steve Railsback was the star or anything, you could almost wonder who the protagonist is of the movie.
Yeah.
Starts like with them on the shuttle, and then, okay, it seems like all of them are dead, and then we get to Earth, and it seems like Bukowski, who has this kind of Quatermass presence, you know, okay, maybe this is going to be about him trying to figure out what happened, okay? And then you have Fallada, who's the scientist, like, okay, maybe it's going to be him, he's going to be the hero. Then Kane shows up, it's like, oh, it's definitely him.
Yeah.
And then Carlson shows up again, you know, in the escape pod from the space shuttle after it got blown up, or burned up, I should say. It's kind of interesting that it almost becomes this slow ensemble piece instead of just one lead character running around doing all this. And let's talk about the director, Tobe Hooper, who, of course...
Oh, wait a minute. We should talk about the other person who's in the cast.
All right, okay.
Oh, yes.
The other one would be Dr. Armstrong, who is, of course...
Patrick Stewart.
In one of his... not his first role, that was Excalibur, but one of his big ones there.
And his first on-screen kiss with my boy, Railsback. Yes, you heard that correctly. Patrick Stewart's first on-screen kiss was with a boy. I mean, how cool is he? Seriously.
It still would have been cool if it was with Peter Firth.
This is true. I'm not denying that. But I still think it's kind of, you know, I mean, the scene itself is really, I think, you know, well-paced, well-acted, even though we'll have our little quibbles there.
Well, we'll get into that in a bit, yeah.
But, I mean, yeah, no, I love Stewart's performance in this. Because at first you think it's, you know, he's just a bit player and, you know, just totally as it seems. And then so totally not.
Yeah, it is kind of a key role. And it's interesting that, you know, early in his career, he did a lot of genre movies. There was Excalibur, this. Right after this, he went on to Dune, and, of course, from there into Star Trek. So, for a serious actor, it's interesting to see him in these kind of roles.
Yeah, he was very heavily involved in the SRC, the Royal Shakespeare Company, as he continues to be. And I think that from some of the interviews that I've seen of him over the years, he got his start in the kind of the genre to sort of, you know, break in, of course, to, you know, the film and television. And then when he got, you know, TNG, all bets were off, you know, first bald starship captain, and in my mind, you know, he's right over there with Shatner.
Oh, yeah. And now he's Professor Xavier. And now,
God,
I mean, another whole legion of fans.
And I'm telling you, this movie, again, prescient, because in this movie, he is the head of an asylum, or as I call it, the School for the Exceptionally Insane. He, in one scene, is wheeled in a wheelchair, totally Professor X, and it's like...
And he has another personality in his mind, and is speaking in that voice.
Yep,
so,
and he pulls Carlson in, you know, using telekinesis or what have you, something to do with the brain, and just Professor X, and it's like, duh.
So we have Proto-Professor X and an alternate James Bond running out the same movie.
Seriously.
All right, here's some interesting things for who almost was in the movie. Supposedly, a lot of this is kind of shadowed and, you know, surrounded in rumor, but Carlson was almost George Papard. That would have been weird.
No.
I think a little old by that point. For Colonel Kane, they tried to get Anthony Hopkins and then Terrence Stamp.
Oh.
Would have been interesting, I'll admit. But
Neil before Kane. I don't know about that.
It's interesting that Armstrong, even though it's kind of a small part, was considered an important one, because here's some of the names for the people they tried to get. Supposedly, they almost had John Gielgud.
Oh.
That would have been very strange.
That would have, but interesting.
I don't know if he could do the freak out the way Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart is a master of freaking out. Peter Jeffrey.
Oh.
And here are two the ones I find really interesting: Tom Baker and Patrick Troughton.
Oh, Doctor Who, yes.
I would love to have seen Patrick Troughton.
Oh, I think Baker would have done just a really interesting, weird job. He totally would have gone in for the kiss. It would have been a whole new experience. Would have been amazing. And
Troughton was also supposedly almost up for the Sir Percy role, which I also could see him
that would have
off.
been interesting.
For Fallada, they originally were trying to get Klaus Kinski.
Okay, that I can see.
But I think it would have been an even more turbulent set with Kinski running around pulling his kind of crazy act. And Olivia Hussey was almost the nurse that the main vampire possesses Ellen. But supposedly, I don't know if this is true, but she got confused and thought she was up for the vampire part and thought there was too much nudity, so she left the production. Saying before, the director is Tobe Hooper, who's best known, of course, for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as well as Eaten Alive and Poltergeist. Poltergeist was such a success, it got him a deal with Canon Films, a 3-picture deal. This was the first. After this, he'd do the remake of Invaders from Mars, which is just as crazy, but kind of aimed at a PG-13
Love Karen
rating.
Black in that movie.
Yep. And then after that was Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which is definitely an odd one, more of a comedy than the original one. He also, of course, did the TV version of Salem's Lot, the original one from the 70s, which was really
that
good.
scared the bejesus out of
Oh,
me.
yeah, that's actually a very good one. The Funhouse, The Mangler, and the last really big one he did was Toolbox Murders. He's done a couple other low-budget, kind of under-the-radar horror movies since then, but he's always stayed in the genre. He seems to love it. Now, we watched the international cut, which is the original director's version. For America, they cut about 10 to 15 minutes out.
Ugh.
And really some very sloppy ones, too. I mean, a lot of it was cutting to increase the pace of the movie. Like the opening scene where they're exploring the alien ship is cut down to the bone.
Yeah, and it's actually moved, so when, like, you see when Carlson first comes to the office and he's, like, giving the backstory, that's when you see, like, the bulk of the of the scenes, where he's actually, like, supposedly telling Kane and Fallada kind of what happened. I prefer it to be as it is in the international version, where you have everything kind of like in the beginning and you can kind of follow the story, and then when Carlson comes in and you see it like certain things from his point of view again, where he's like telling him, you know, his version of the story, and then of course we get the truth later on where it's revealed that Carlson is a big fat liar.
But also, a lot of the stuff involving Bukowski and Fallada at the Rocket Center is missing. I mean, Fallada has no introduction in the original theatrical one. He just kind of wanders into a scene looking for Bukowski, and that's it. We don't know who he is or why he's there. A lot of the stuff of them trying to analyze the aliens and the weird crystal cases that come in, that's missing. The movie actually gives away one of the bigger twists later on. Midway through the movie, they go to this mental hospital trying to find out where the main vampire is, and it turns out that was just a ruse to get them away from London while the infection is spreading. But in the theatrical version for America, they actually cut in some scenes of vampire victims running around attacking people before that, so we already know that. So it was a really odd, sloppy cut, too. And the big thing is a lot of the homoerotic stuff has been trimmed out of that one as well.
Which I was so disappointed. Seeing the international version as an adult really kind of made, one, a lot more sense, and two, just really sort of made me feel nice, to be honest. Because, I mean, I'm the tones and the way that they structure the film in that subset where you have this amazing, like, you know, compulsion and attraction between Carlson and the space girl. And then in the scene where Patrick Stewart has her in his body, they're sharing kind of one mind, and she's trapped in there because of this medication that they give him. You know, and she's kind of pulling him in to, like, you know, kiss him and to, you know, break the spell so she can somehow escape, I guess, or at least transfer energy. You know, when I first saw that in the theatrical cut that was on TV, you know, of course they expedited a lot out of that because they were like, no, I can't show that.
The kiss is gone, and a lot of the shots of Patrick Stewart talking have been replaced by Matilda May talking instead, so it doesn't creep people out, apparently. Yeah,
which I wasn't creeped out. I was like, cool.
Yeah.
This is amazing. I like this. And then, of course, you know, international version, full lip-on-lip contact.
Oh, yeah.
Again, like I said, first screen kiss, Patrick Stewart. Amazing.
But also, little tiny bits, like at the end when Peter Firth is confronting the male vampire, and he has that great creepy line, it'll be much less terrifying if you just come to me.
Yeah. And again, not his voice, but that's okay. In that particular instance, dubbing works.
Yep.
And let me just say this, that space vampire was hot. Just gonna throw that in there.
One of them is Chris Jagger, Mick Jagger's brother. The other one
awesome.
is Bill Mallon. I don't know if I couldn't find anything else that he's been in, but
I think he's the hot one. Not that Chris isn't. All right, let me amend. Not that Chris Jagger isn't hot as well, but in my humble opinion, Bill was the hotter of the vampires, and subsequently gets it in the end. Haha.
That brings up another thing, because there's just so much sex in this movie. The whole movie, we kept finding innuendo in everything.
It is just one big space penis. It's just
which could describe the ship. Yeah,
pretty much. Well, yeah. I mean, you got space penis, you got blood tits. There's this great scene that, again, you know, I never saw either in the theatrical cut or the one I saw on TV, where the spoilers, they had just escaped from the mental institution, and they have Patrick Stewart, he's unconscious, and they have the dead body of Sir Percy, and they're traveling in the helicopter, and then all of a sudden you see blood spurting out of like Patrick Stewart's face, and like and Sir Percy's face coalescing into this form of the space girl. Well, actually, first you just see her literally blood tits,
which I didn't
like,
even really see.
No, but like they focus like on her torso kind of comes together out of the blood of these two bodies, and then it's her full, like, at first it looks like an animatronic puppet, and then it coalesces into Matilda May with, as you said, Tim, the flesh hair.
Yeah, which is really weird looking.
Yeah. It looks like Nightbreed, not Narcisse, but the one who bites Boone.
Oh yeah,
Nathaniel Parker.
Yeah.
Well, the director who was a big friend of Clive Barker's. It looks like his dreads.
His weird tendril things coming out, like I said, yeah.
But yeah, so we get Matilda May in like full, like, made out of blood with her blood tits hanging out.
But also, I mean, even little bits of dialogue, like, you know, the rescue shuttle comes in and hooks up with the Churchill, and we are good for soft dock. And I'm like, No,
you don't want a soft dock.
I mean, there's so many phallic objects, guys holding the little key thing to open up the door. I mean, Peter Firth running around with this big, giant metal spear, running around posing in the streets, and then, you know, using it to stab the male vampire, and then helping Carlson use it to I had to call it the double penetration, and stab both himself and the space girl in the end.
Yeah, definitely full on.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of that, and weird. All these lines that can just be taken in totally the wrong context.
Oh my God. Yeah, very tab A into slot B in this movie. Very.
I guess we should discuss going back to the scene between Patrick Stewart and Railsback. That's
my favorite scene.
One of the big scenes for me where Railsback falls apart is because he's doing the freak out, and he's up against Patrick Stewart, who is a master of doing very great Shakespearean freakouts. I mean, anyone who's seen Star Trek, once a season he'd have one where he's there are 4 lights, that kind of thing. And seeing him do it here this early in his career, it's just it's beautiful to see. And Railsback is just kind of screaming his head off. And
I love the Railsback scream though.
Where are you? Where's your body? Let me go! Let me go! Let me go! Let me go!
There's something about when I first saw that, I was like, why is this guy like screaming and yelling? I was just like in awe of like the whole performance. And yes, okay, it's a little cheesy, I'm not gonna lie.
Lots of like teeth gritted line readings too. Like, I mean, you can take a drink every time he goes, "The girl, the girl."
But no, I dig it because it's for me what it brought to my mind was, okay, this guy is so crazy. This chick has literally driven him batty, and he's just gonna friggin' freak out and just try to get as much information as he can while getting a little something on the side from Patrick as he can. And it just, you know, I mean, yes, looking back on it now as an adult seeing it, you could see kind of flaws in Railsback's performance. I'm not gonna you know, lie.
It doesn't help that, I mean, so much of the story, at least in the book, is psychological. It's in the characters' heads, and he has given a lot of very crazy dialogue to try and explain all that, and a lot of it is kind of awkward on you know, on the face of it anyway. But I think certain actors can sell that a little better. I think he has some trouble with it here.
I just love Railsback. Again, maybe it's nostalgic, but I just love his performance in this. And this was kind of just made such an impression on me as a young kid.
Maybe I'm a little prejudiced by the 2 X-Files episodes he was in where he played Dwayne Barry, and he's so over the top in that one that now that's all I see whenever I look at any of his performances.
When they take spoilers, if you guys haven't seen X-Files, it's a show that's 20 years, seriously. But for spoilers, when Dana is abducted and Dwayne is like freaking out, and he's like, "They didn't take me, you can't take me anymore, you know, they're gone." I was like, I just said Lifeforce. Yes. I was like, yes, he's back.
Yep. But getting back into the sex thing, which you can't really escape with this movie.
God, no, and thank God.
It's interesting how it's all over the movie in different forms. Like, okay, just basically sexual obsession and what it does to Carlson, but also in the homoeroticism. There's also, of course, the metaphor for the AIDS crisis, which was becoming a lot more prevalent in the mid-1980s and is actually a subtext for a lot of horror movies around that era, especially anything involving vampires. Also a little bit of the BDSM thing too with the nurse, and which is weird because the way that's cut in the theatrical version, he has this line where he mentions that she's a masochist and he has to basically hurt her to get the information he's trying to get out of her, and that's cut out. So all of a sudden he's just kind of grabbing and attacking this woman for no real reason in the original version. Here, with the longer version, when you have that dialogue, it makes sense and explores, another aspect of sex.
Right.
And of course you have Kane just sitting there like, oh, I'm a natural voyeur. I'll just sit here and watch.
He's just like, where's my opera glasses? Let's,
Another day at the office.
Pretty much. Just total badass Peter Firth.
Oh, yeah. And getting back to what I mentioned at the end, the whole relationship between him and the space girl, as she's kind of referred to, the main vampire, didn't totally make sense. But watching it this past time, at the end, after he stabs her and they fly back into the alien ship, you notice when it reforms, the crystals kind of pop up where they originally found the vampires, and it looks like there are like fetuses or babies in there, which made me think maybe this whole movie is kind of basically her mating ritual in a way, that she mates with him to start a whole new group of vampires that'll come back in another 76 years once the comet shows up again.
So basically, we're fucked.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, except now I'm sure Kane's grandchildren will be ready for the fight because they'll have all the information they need.
Yeah, they'll have their trench coats and turtlenecks ready.
Yep, they'll be ready. And they'll have that weird phallic giant spear thing that comes out of nowhere.
Definitely. That'll be left in Grandpa's will.
It's interesting to see the reaction to this movie. I mean, it was really critically panned when it came out for the most part. And it gained a cult following, which a lot of it from people I know is, it's the movie with that naked space girl.
And there's the nudity.
Yeah.
But I think one of the I mean there are a lot of like horror films that have a lot of nudity in them that haven't I don't, and this is just my opinion, but haven't had as much longevity as this film has had. I mean, this was released on DVD in I think 2001.
Around that, the bare bones one.
Yeah, the bare bones one. And and then of course Scream Factory did it, released it last year, with a great, unfortunately the US didn't get the great 2-hour documentary.
I'd love to see what's on that.
Yeah, I've seen bits and pieces, and it's just totally amazing. It's so amazing that I almost invested in the Region 2 DVD just to get that documentary, because on the US Blu-ray, you get these great interviews with Railsback and Matilda May, and a great little piece on Toby Hooper, of course, and a great commentary. But that 2-hour documentary has so much more information about the making of the film.
I just love to see some behind the scenes, fly on the wall kind of footage, especially the animatronics, because the puppet effects in this are really good. You have the giant bats, but mostly the desiccated husk people. When that guard who's first attacked comes to life and attacks the pathologist, that
freaks me out.
The movement, the eyes, those weird arm movements he makes as he's drawing the guy in. It's really good, and even more the female one later on that they find and strapped to the table, who has that freak out and explodes. Just as she's kind of writhing on the table, it's really disturbing to watch. Her eyes rolling, everything. It has that spark of life that a good effect should have. It's just
yeah, it definitely gives you a creepy feeling up the spine.
On a couple of the other interesting effects fronts, the blue light that's constantly flying around, rather than just use traditional animation, they actually took lasers, reflected them onto silvery mylar, and then bounced that onto a projection screen. And because it was mylar, they could bend it into shapes like we see it a lot of times going in a weird circle around things. And then they had to use rotoscoping, where they kind of draw on the frame to composite it and to put it in behind characters. And it was a huge amount of optical work, it looks like, but it really pays off. It still looks great.
It definitely works, yeah.
And for London Burning, they actually had a kind of a model village of London that had been closed down, and they were allowed to basically just blow the shit out of it.
Oh, fantastic.
And it really looks great, especially with the little radio-controlled helicopter flying over it as Kane and Carlson are trying to get back into London.
I think it's more of a thing for me because this is during the time when I was growing up and I saw these movies like the original Star Wars, the great matte painting, and the great miniature work of Derek Meddings, and just seeing those wonderful things. But I always have enjoyed more the practical effects. I know in this day and age there's been some great CGI Gollum, and there's been some really bad CGI Sharknado. And and you can kind of fall somewhere in between most of the time, but for me, it's just great to see, such awesome practical effects. Some of them don't quite hold up today. But very rarely does that happen. And definitely, I mean, at least in my mind, doesn't take you out of the movie at all.
Right. Well, especially for me, it's like the makeup and puppetry effects. In this one, when that guard again is kind of feeding for the first time, and we see his face slowly inflating.
Yeah.
It's
that
a really
bubble effect.
Yeah, and until it's perfectly, the original actor again, it's a really good effect. It still holds up pretty well.
Oh yeah, and then like at the end when spoilers, Falada is revealed to be a victim, and it shows him kind of with the face bubbling, and I swear he looks like James Coburn.
He really does.
Yeah, and it's freaky, but it so totally works.
And his face is suddenly bubbling and starting to expand and stuff,
yeah.
like he's going to blow up, yeah.
And he says, "Well, here I go."
That's
in this really weird, creepy voice, and it's just like, and that's when I fell in love with Frank Finlay.
Well, it's interesting you had mentioned the question in that scene whether he is trying to get himself killed by Kane or not. And when I first saw it, I just thought I actually thought he was the other male vampire. He had been possessed. But and then I thought, okay, well, he's just another one of the other ones, and he was going to attack him. But yeah, watching it now, it looks like he knows what Kane's going to do.
Yeah, because he like when Kane asks him, Falada, are you? And he just kind of smiles, and Kane just like very, very sort of just leaves it like, all right, really, we're gonna do this now. And Falada just opens his arms, and not to like compel him to come to him, but just like, okay, go ahead, do it. And then he shoots him, solar plexus, boom, done. And then he goes into the line and just...
I love that he kind of, even in that last moment, shows a kind of a humor. There's kind of an amusement
very much
about
so.
it. That line about, the cathedral, where else but the tomb of kings and queens. That there's almost something theatrical about it that he's enjoying, which, again, kind of goes back to the Hammer horror movies and that the style performance you'd see in those, yeah. Well, one interesting thing I also noticed, you can kind of see the influence of this movie in other ones. I mean, you look at Species, which is, again, naked alien woman menacing mankind, and another popular one with audiences, especially on video because of that. And even now, although I'd say it's a very different film, with Under the Skin with Scarlett Johansson is kind of along the same lines as well. So it's interesting to see that kind of alien femme fatale trope has persisted after this movie.
Yeah, and I think that... it's great to see a lot of callbacks to Lifeforce throughout those films. Not in like any way kind of in your face, but definitely kind of going along those same lines. And at one point in the film, the space girl is described as the most feminine presence that this person has ever known. And you could definitely say that about one of the great actresses of our day, Scarlett Johansson. And when I say that, I mean in terms of, both beauty and talent. And so she's definitely, to a lot of people, the epitome of the feminine right now. And to see her in that performance that's so great and so creepy and so just unsettling, and it really brings to mind a lot of great callbacks to Matilda May.
It's interesting how this movie is kind of a fusion of things from the past and things that will be big in the future. Like the beginning of it feels very much like a Quatermass movie. Rocket come back to Earth, alien menace out there. The group that launched it up there has got to solve the mystery and stop the menace before it spreads. There's a touch of the unit years from Doctor Who, where the British military would handle all these things.
I was expecting the Brigadier to come up at some point.
Exactly. They're very stiff upper lip, and yes, we'll take care of that. Then it almost becomes a detective movie midway through, where they're trying to track where the female vampire went, and then by the end it's a zombie movie, which of course is the big thing now, with everyone running around London attacking each other left and right.
Very Walking Dead.
And one other movie that almost could be a predecessor to this, I don't know if you've ever seen Queen of Blood.
No.
It's a really odd one from the late 60s with Florence Marley playing kind of this female vegetable alien vampire thing. It has like John Saxon, Dennis Hopper, Basil Rathbone, really odd, eclectic cast. But I caught up with that a couple of years ago, and it does kind of feel like almost a preliminary version of this.
Now, is that a Hammer horror film? Or?
No, I think it's an AIP one, actually.
Huh.
But if you ever get the chance to check it out, it's worth it. A lot of Florence Marley has almost no dialogue in it, and she gives the camera these weird, creepy looks as she's hypnotizing guys into it. And looking at it's like, I can see a lot of this movie in that one. Right, I think that about covers it for Lifeforce, unless there's anything else you want to add to.
Again, I just want to say, blood tits. I mean, you can't... I mean, the movie is so much more than that, but I think if you're going to distill it down to its basest elements, I think that's where you're going to have to go to. Yeah. Again, one of my favorite movies from my childhood. a weird choice, I'll grant you. But, you know, it feels as fresh as it did back then, and I know that it can be an acquired taste, but I think that it seems so different from... It has elements of space exploration and the unknown, you know, very alien-esque in that sense. You know, you also have the whole, like, as you said, the Dracula aspect.
The gothic horror,
of it. Yep, definitely Hammer horror. And then, of course, and this is going to sound totally weird, but the weird love story between Space Girl and Carlson, and how there's so much passion, lust,
obsession,
revulsion.
Yep.
And it's just so interesting to see kind of how it plays out. And you can almost make the argument that there's like the movie threesome. There's Carlson, Space Girl, and Kane. And it's just really interesting to see their dynamic and see where the characters go. It's basically played out over the course of like a night. Or maybe like 24 hours.
Well, a couple days when they have to bring Carlson in, they kind of skip over a bit of time there.
Yeah.
But it is a very small time frame that the movie takes place in, definitely.
Yeah, just again, I have to say that, you know, definitely if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth a look. I recommend it. 2 thumbs way up.
I almost think it wasn't really ready for that time. If it had been released now, I think audiences are a little more tuned to deal with a movie that has so much strange stuff in it and changes so much and goes on such a strange path that you're not quite expecting. There are parts of it that are still very cheesy, a lot of the dialogue that they have, the way they have to get across some of the ideas. And I still think Railsback is a little too far out there for me, especially surrounded by all these very reserved British actors. I mean, he's the crazy American.
Exactly, and that's why we love him.
Yeah, but it is a ton of fun. I mean, you're never bored watching it.
And definitely just want to mention a great score by Henry Mancini.
Yeah, a lot of it is taken out for the American version and replaced by Michael Kamen stuff, which sounds kind of like, again, a bit of Hammer horror mixed with like Jerry Goldsmith. But it sounds like standard horror stuff, and this is much more kind of booming, adventurous
I mean,
action
that great
stuff.
Main theme. I mean, I put that on my iPod, and just, you know, when I want to have a nice brisk walk and just feel like kicking some space vampire ass.
Well, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy this. Hope you enjoy the movie. And we'll be talking to you soon with some other weird, strange film, no doubt. Bye now.
Bye-bye.